Xenosystems Fragments. Simulated Gnon-Theology. Nickland. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. This post was to have been about the simulation argument, but Gnon does the preliminary work. Whether or not we are living in a computer simulation can quickly come to seem like a derivative consideration. Nature or nature's God, unknown here as Gnon, provides skepticism with its ultimate object. With this name we can advance in suspension, freeing thought from any ground in belief. In its mundane application, Gnon permits realism to exceed doctrinal conviction, reaching reasonable conclusions amongst uncertain information. Its invocation, however, is not necessarily mundane. Assume, momentarily, that God exists. If this assumption comes easily, so much the better. It is probably obvious, almost immediately, that you do not yet have a clear idea about what you are thus assuming. To mark exactly this fact, the established Abrahamic religions propose that you designate God by a proper name, which corresponds to a definite yet profoundly occulted personal individual. Approaching the same obscurity from the other side, emphasizing the problematic rather than relational aspect, I will persevere in the name of Gnon. To avoid gratuitous idolatry, all our subsequent assumptions must be readily retractable. It is not our mission to tell Gnon what it is. We cannot but be aware, from the beginning, that two perplexing and intertwined sources of idolatry will be especially difficult to dispel, due to their conceptual intractability, and their insinuation into the basic fabric of grammar and narrative. In merely using the tense verb to be, and in unfolding a process in stages, we unwittingly idolize Gnon as a subordinate of being in time. Our sole refuge lies in the recognition, initially inarticulate, that to think Gnon is God is to advance a hyperontological and metachronic hypothesis. From Gnon's self-understanding, being and time have to emerge as exhaustively comprehended consequences, even though we have no idea at all what this might mean. If Gnon is God, it is the reality of infinite intelligence. Occidental religious tradition divides this ultimate infinitude into the topics of omniscience, omnipotence, and omnibenevolence, at the risk of introducing footholds for anthropomorphism and thus idolatry. Accepting a contrary risk, one that Pope Benedict XVI specifically indicated as Islamic? I will simply dismiss the possibility that God can be theologically other than good, since this would be an invitation to Lovecraftian speculations of distracting vividness. Thomas scholasticism offers a further simplification, by proposing that what there is to know is that which God creates. Pursued, perhaps, one step further, self-knowledge is the auto-creation of a being that thinks itself into reality. This, too, offers a conceptual economy to be eagerly seized. The creation of the universe is of concern to humans, and the creation of angels is a grave matter for Satan, but for Gnon they can only be trivialities. It might be unnecessarily antagonistic to say amusements. For Gnon as God the Kantorian transfinite realm is self-identity, or less, whose infinite parts are each infinities. Unless choosing to blaspheme, we can only assume that Gnon thinks serious thoughts, of a kind that have some relevance to its thinking about itself, and thus ensuring itself in its hyperontological auto-creation. Such thoughts surely encompass the creation of gods, since that for a God is simply the transfinite as intelligent activity. If for Gnon to know what it can do is already to have done it, because divine intelligence is creation, anything less than an infinite pantheon would be evidence of retardation. For Gnon, as God, gods are infinitesimals, so that any thorough self-investigation would involve them. It is effortlessness itself, for it, to thus create an infinite being among an infinity of such beings each of which, being infinite, is made of infinities, and these in turn, as infinities, consist of infinite infinities, without end. This is no more than Cantor had already understood, at the most elementary stage of his transfinite explorations, although, being a human creature, his understanding was not immediately creation. If Satan, a mere archangel, could imagine himself a god, and not only a god, but, in potential at least, God seated upon the throne of ultimate sovereignty, is it possible that no god thinks itself God? And if a god can, if only in possibility, think itself God, can God not think this rebellion and thus know it, which is to create it, or make it real? Does not God's self-understanding necessitate the creation of cosmic insurrection? From the satanic perspective, such questions are overwhelmingly fascinating, but they lead to a more intricate predicament. When Gnon, as God, thinks through its gods, as it can only do, the thought necessarily arises, if these god creatures can confuse themselves with God, could not my self-understanding as God also be a confusion?